Well, good morning, friends. It's been a long time since the three of us have been together. Life's moving on, as I'm sure it's moving on with you. So, the cast of this drama or comedy, whatever you want to say.
Or both?
I'm Mike Troutman. I'm retired pastor in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're joined by the Reverend Jennifer Long, who is the only active, well, the only, yes, active pastor among us today. And she's in Corning, New York, and joined by the Reverend Dr. Steve Langford, who also is an active pastor, but he's retired as well from Arlington, Texas. And today we're going to be reading from Genesis and the Gospel of John.
I'm going to start us off with just the first three verses of Genesis chapter 2. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation.
I'm reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 15, part of that great text about abiding, using the imagery of the vine and the branches. John chapter 15, verse 9 from the New Revised Standard. Now, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I've called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from the Father. And that's the end of verse 15. That's right. All right, the word of God.
Word of life.
Right.
So this is a narrative lectionary piece that's a 3-week sermon series on Sabbath. And this is actually, we're coming in together on what is the second week. Last week, I preached on Deuteronomy 5, which is really kind of a restating of the end of the same thing Genesis says. And Matthew 11, which is my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So, and this week we come to God resting and hallowing the Sabbath, and joy and love one another in the Gospel of John. So what do you guys do with Sabbath?
Ignore it.
That sounds human to me.
Yeah, I think, at least in the traditional way of understanding Sabbath, it's pretty much ignored. I would think in the sense that, resting from all places and things and contemplating the goodness and graciousness of God. Must say I haven't been that loyal to that understanding. It's hard to do in the modern world. Saying it's hard to do doesn't give it an excuse. It's just stating my experience.
Yeah, we live in a culture that values busyness. And, when you ask people how they're doing, they'll say staying busy, as though that's a merit badge. And so busyness does not allow for that spirit of Sabbath where
Yeah, I also think busyness, what I have noticed, and let me be clear, I'm speaking from an experience I do not have, but what I think I've observed in others, is that the busiest people I know are retired.
Hey,
And so part of my wondering has been, will I get busier as I move towards retirement and less active in work that is paid work? And if I do, what will that have to do with? And I don't know what it has to do with for others, but one of the things I wonder for myself is, well, I keep busy because it means I'm not dead, that I don't have a real sense of what it is to be without a job. And so, again, that's for me. But I don't know. What keeps us so busy?
well, we've grown up in a culture shaped by the Puritan work ethic, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And so there's this religious trend that underlies much of this.
That's an interesting idea.
So we've got conflicting religious perspectives. One from the Hebrew culture that says rest is important, refocus is important. The other from the Puritan world that says, oh, rest is dangerous. You might end up, being tempted.
That's really interesting. I was thinking how I don't know that I've got any statistics for this or data, but I think probably this is we did not read it in the context of the commandment. I think we read it where it comes kind of first in the Decalogue, which first in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible as we know it. But what I was thinking is it easier for Christians to ignore it? Like, that's Sabbath is a Jewish thing. It's not our thing.
This is the Lord's Day.
Yeah.
It's not a right or wrong. I just think, sometimes one of the things humans do is we look at what separates us. That's theirs, not ours.
But what's the underlying principle behind Sabbath? What are they driving at? What is the truth that they see that our productivity-oriented culture fails to see? And that is that we are not machines. We've got to have downtime, recuperation time, restoration time.
Well, I think at a very basic level, Genesis says God rested, so you rest too. Period.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a reason it's only 3 verses that get read this Sunday. This isn't rocket science. God rested, you rest, just do it.
Yeah. But beyond the straight obedience and conformity is, so what's underlying it? Why is it that we do that? Now, I'm going to flip this a little bit. An interesting take on this is that God rested, but that didn't mean that God stopped. To rest is that God rested from the creating portion of God's work, of putting things in place. God's rest then became continuing to work to bring it to maturity, to bring it to its intended end.
I think that really begs the question. Somebody actually asked this last Sunday. So how do you define work? And how do you define rest? How do you know when you've rested? So I heard somebody talking about, when I get home from work, when I've had a long day at work, I go out into the yard and I garden. And that can be considered work. But yes, for them, it is joy and release. This is what they want to do when they get home. So I really think for me that part of the challenge of both texts is how do we understand them, take them, and then make them our own? How do I think about work? And then how do we as church think about work?
Or better, how do we think about renewal and restoration, such as I'm working in my garden because it renews me. It gives me a sense of reorientation. And I see that in the John text of this concept of abiding. Abiding is maintaining the connection so that the very life of Christ becomes our life and flows in us and through us. The result being joy and the ability to keep commandments of love.
I think what particularly jumped out at me from John were the ideas of connection. Sabbath is about connection. Sabbath is about love, and Sabbath is about joy.
Well, as I read the John text, the connection is the source out of which the joy flows and out of which the love flows. And the connection is rooted in the fact that it's not a slavish obedience to the commands, but I have called you friends. I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing my life with you. So it's a different kind of connection.
And, you know, I think it's important for us to remember how Jesus reorients all this. You know, it's not a slavish rest, you know, an unawares rest. It is aware of the connection we have with other people. So that if we see Jesus use the example of someone injured on the way, is it because of the Sabbath that we pass them by? No. Because of our connection with that person, we break that slavish or almost, can't think of the word, it's routine-ish. You know, we have to rest, it's a Sabbath kind of thing, and turn it into a dynamic thing. So from a passive way of living to a dynamic way of living that keeps us aware of our connection, not only to one another, but what feeds that connection, to pick up what you said, Steve, that connection to God, the abidingness in God allows us then to reach out and compassion and to maybe in some ways violate a very passive understanding. For the first time, I'm thinking that obedience to the Sabbath really is a much more active thing than we've given credit for. We make it active, passive kind of thing. I don't think it's that at all. I think that's a misunderstanding of what the Sabbath should be.
I think that's a very narrow understanding. It doesn't give it the breadth and depth that Sabbath really has when we think about it that way.
And Sabbath is one of the means to abiding.
Yeah.
And Sabbath is not just a day, but it becomes a pattern that we build into our everyday. Where is the resting in the everyday so that we abide?
Well, and yeah, I guess the other thing I'm thinking of is, are there also some days when we don't rest? Maybe it can't be built into every day. That there are some days when you are, it's just the first one, when you are grieving, there isn't time for me to rest then. I need to do this now. I need to be present to this and attentive to this now. If somebody is dying, I need to be present and attentive to this. And maybe there's rest in that too.
Being present, abiding, and Sabbath are what teach us how to be present in those moments. I think one of the products of Sabbath, one of the products of abiding, is the ability to be present, that is, to love. Yeah. Another way of defining love, being present to the other.
And I'm just curious about the different world that we live in. And the day when these words first were spoken about God resting, it was a different world. You didn't have time to rest. It was life and death kind of thing in a way that it isn't for many of us, at least in our situations in the world, where we can rest any number of different ways and times. We have the capacity to separate our work from our survival.
That is so interesting. I have been thinking about how maybe it's harder to observe Sabbath in our day and age, because even when you're away from work, you're not away from work because your phone's in your pocket. I can think about times in the pastorate where that happens, but it's not just me. I mean, my husband works as a plant manager, and I can think of times when I've heard his phone dinging all through the night. And there isn't any, I can ask, do you really need to answer that? But the bottom line is, even if you don't answer it, it's still there. It's piling up. People can be, doing this stuff all the time. So I just think it's interesting, the kind of the parallel in a way that their stuff was life and death, but our stuff also, there are ways that it does not stop either.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's for both groups, the decision to be present in a different way to the world and to others that the Sabbath invites us to, especially to God. It is a time that it calls us to be different than we are in the world that we live in. To build on what you said, Jen, that we can be busy 24 hours a day if we so choose to be. And as the ancients were faced with that choice, especially those of the 99% of human beings in the world, when these words were spoken, that to not be active and doing something put at risk your survival, your very being. And even God says at that point, rest because I got you.
I wonder if one of the things that John is so clear about might be an opportunity to look for what are markers that what I'm experiencing is Sabbath. Does it include connection with others? Does it include love? And love the way Jesus taught it, which is not just, loving God, loving Jesus, and loving self, and that those three things are intertwined. And I think that the joy that Jesus hopes may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. I wonder if Sabbath rest is the ability to get to that completion. I don't know. I'm playing with that.
I like the concept, Jen, of markers. The markers of Sabbath being the ability to experience joy, the ability to love others, going back to Mike's comment, being present to God is evidenced in how we are able to be present to one another and to these situations. Yeah.
I mean, I also know that for me, Sabbath gives me something when I take it. I mean, I can tell the difference between rest that was really rest and rest that wasn't. Because after the fact, I'm more effective, I'm more clear, I'm more focused. It's just, I'm different.
And what we need to remember here is that Sabbath looks different for each of us. Jesus talked about loving God with heart, mind, soul, and strength, the 4 dimensions of our human being personalities. But each of those reflect a different way of a spiritual language, if you please. And so head people rest differently than heart people, who rest differently from hands people, who rest differently from the mystic. So we can't impose one style or kind of rest on everybody. It doesn't work.
Well, again, I think that's part of it is figuring it out. And
what works for me? Yeah.
What works for me and what works for our congregation? Does it all look the same? Does it look the same all the time? Anyway,
No, I think that's wise, but much harder, because it's easier to give one straight answer. This is what it is. But
just sit and do nothing, and you'll be fine, and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
And that makes it back into the ritual, Mike, that you were talking about, rather than the dynamics of a relationship.
Yeah. So are we inviting people to say that, hey, this is your work?
Ouch.
And the community's work.
You know what? That's kind of funny. Sabbath rest is your work.
Preach.
Isn't that kind of
Whoa.
fun?
Yeah,
That's
that's fun.
fun.
I mean, it's
Well-
like, oh no, not another thing I gotta work on. I want something
Well-
easy.
Isn't it part of what Paul wrote in Philippians? Work out your own salvation.
Yeah.
What does this look like for you?
Yeah. Great stuff. And believe it or not, we are to the end of our minutes of conversation. So I'm wondering, who would like to pray us out? Shall we arm wrestle for the opportunity to do that?
Let's flip coins, shall we?
Who's got a coin? I don't.
I got it.
Okay.
What do you have? What do you got? What, heads or tails? It's only one or
Heads.
two. Heads, Steve.
Y'all are two are heads and I'm tails. So that's me, huh? All
Okay,
right,
you
I'll
win.
bring us out. Oh, so merciful God, for the gift of Sabbath, we give you thanks. For the gift of relationship, we give you thanks. So teach us to abide in you, that we might truly love and live with joy. Teach us to be present to you through Sabbath, through abiding, that we might be present to others in the higher walks of life, is our prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Peace, friends.
Peace.
Peace.